November 12, 1942. Aegean Sea, off the island of Rhodes. Spray slaps against the rust-streaked hull of the German mine layer Drake as she shoulders through a low swell, her boilers thumping like a slow, tired heartbeat beneath the deck. On the aftergun platform, where once only a 5-centimeter gun had dominated the view, a strange latticework of steel tubing and wires now squats on a tiny wooden deck, something that looks less like a war machine and more like a half-finished scaffolding project left out in the salt air. Lieutenant Sergei Ernst Keller tugs his greatcoat tighter as a gust whips across the open stern, carrying coal smoke, hot oil, and the thin, acrid tang of aviation fuel. He squints at the contraption. A single radial engine, its cylinders studding out like a mechanical sunflower, sits behind an open seat. Above it, two narrow rotor masts lean toward each other, their blades poised to intermesh like the teeth of a giant clock. Someone in the flak crew snorts behind him. So this is Flettner's hummingbird? Looks more like a child's toy thrown together from scrap. A mechanic in oil-stained overalls swings around, defensive.
"It's called Kolibri for a reason, Matros," he mutters, tapping the side of the Brahmos 14 engine with a gloved knuckle. The rotors cross each other. No tail rotor, no big boom sticking out to break off in a crosswind. It can sit on a postage stamp and still go up. Another sailor laughs. "Up, maybe. Let's see if it can come back down in one piece." From the deckhouse door, Korvettenkapitan Paul Hartmann steps out, cap pulled low, binoculars slung tight against his gray greatcoat. He pauses just long enough to let the mocking die in the sailors' throats as his gaze sweeps over the skeletal machine. To him, it still looks fragile. Fabric-covered steel tubes, a spidery frame, no armor, nothing of the brutish solidity of a Stuka or a Heinkel, but the reports from Travemünde and the Baltic had been clear, stable in wind, obedient to the controls, impossible to ignore. "Lieutenant Keller," he calls, "our toy is due to earn its keep today." Keller turns, heels clicking together on the steel deck. "Jawohl, Herr Korvettenkapitän." They both glance toward the aftmost corner of the ship, where a narrow wooden platform has been bolted onto the superstructure like an afterthought, barely big enough for a field kitchen, let alone a flying machine. On that platform, Feldwebel Karl Brenner straps himself into the lonely seat of the FL-282 Kolibri, the harness creaking as he tightens it across his wool flight suit. A leather helmet clamps headphones to his ears. A short whip antenna juts from the frame behind him, linking him by radio to the ship's operations room. Below the fragile landing gear, the sea yawns and heaves, only a few meters away. A misjudged takeoff, a sideways gust, and the hummingbird will tumble straight into the white-tipped waves. The mechanic leans in, shouting over the rising cough of the radial engine as it sputters to life. "Fuel good, oil good. Keep her under 2300 RPM until you're clear." Brenner nods once, fingers wrapping around the twin sticks that control the intermeshing rotors, boots braced on the rudder pedals that trim the machine instead of a tail rotor. You can almost feel his heartbeat sync with the growing snarl of the engine as the blades blur above him, their arcs crossing so close that from the deck they seem about to collide. On the bridge, Hartmann watches, jaw tight. He remembers the older officers at fleet meetings in Kiel and Berlin smirking when the word helicopter came up. Autogyros that wandered across decks in a crosswind, oddball prototypes that spent more time in workshops than over the sea. "Interesting toys," one admiral had scoffed, "but not for serious war at sea." Down below, the engine note steadies. Brenner eases back on the control stick, the Kolibri's tricycle undercarriage trembling as weight bleeds off the wheels. For a heartbeat, the hummingbird seems to cling to the planks, then it peels upward, almost lazily, clearing the stern rail by less than a meter as the ship's wake unwinds beneath it like a foaming white ribbon.
From the open cockpit, the Aegean spreads out in a patchwork of blue and gray. The broken backs of islands lie scattered across the horizon, Rhodes, Kos, Leros, each a stepped amphitheater of rock and scrub that can conceal a cove, a fishing boat, or an enemy submarine recharging its batteries at night. At barely 300 meters, Brenner can already see more than Drache's highest lookout can from the mast, the water's surface flattened by altitude into a sheet of shifting glass. His task is simple on paper. Sweep a sector ahead of Drache and 2 escorting gunboats, searching for surfaced submarines or the telltale wakes of small Allied freighters trying to slip between the islands under cover of haze. The Kolibri's slow cruising speed is no handicap here. Its gift is that it can loiter, turn on a pfennig, and hover if needed, keeping eyes fixed on a single patch of sea until the pattern of waves reveals what lies beneath. Below him, Drache shrinks to a dark smear topped with a pale feather of wake, her guns already trained outward toward invisible threats. Brenner nudges the pedals, the intermeshing rotors responding with a subtle tilt that swings his view across a vacant horizon. He thinks of the trials months earlier in the Baltic, landing and taking off from a cruiser's turret in sleet and spray, the deck heaving like a drunk beneath him while officers on the bridge muttered into field glasses. Back then, the helicopter had been an experiment. Today, over the Aegean, it is a set of borrowed wings for the Kriegsmarine, fragile but suddenly indispensable. The radio crackles in his ears. Kolibri 1, this is Drache, a clipped voice barks. Report visibility. He thumbs the transmit switch. Visibility good, haze to the south, light chop, proceeding to assigned searchline. His eyes keep moving, trained now to read the sea like a map. The way wind carves long streaks, the way a shoal brightens the water, the way a ship's wake drags a white scar far beyond the hull that made it. Then he sees it, not a periscope, not yet, but a thin, straight line of disturbed water where none should be, just beyond the shoulder of a small, uninhabited island. It is the kind of faint signature that a lookout on a pitching deck would miss, but from above, in the stable hover of the Kolibri, it stands out like a fingerprint on glass. Brenner eases back the power, the hummingbird hanging over the spot as the rotors chop the air into a rushing roar around him. The line of wake curves slightly, then straightens again, as if something beneath the surface is adjusting course, slow, deliberate, blind to the eye of the sky now resting above it. He feels a prickle at the back of his neck as the sea reveals more, a faint, elongated, darker smudge beneath the water, running parallel to the wake. His thumb hits the transmit switch again, voice tighter now. Kolibri 1 to Drache, possible submarine wake, bearing 095 from my position, distance approximately 3 kilometers from your track, moving northeast, speed slow. On Drache's bridge, Hartmann's binoculars snap up at the same instant that his navigating officer bends over the chart, pencil already tracing vectors. Around them, the old jokes about toys and hummingbirds die unspoken, smothered beneath the realization that for the first time, the ship is seeing beyond the curve of the waves in real time. Out over the water, the helicopter hangs like a small, stubborn insect against the vastness of sea and sky, rotors interlacing in a mechanical blur as it pins the unseen intruder with its gaze. Below, in the dark, a submerged hull glides on, unaware that the thing once mocked as a toy has just turned the surface of the Aegean into a glass roof over its head. March 14, 1943. Aboard the mine layer Drache, patrolling the Strait of Otranto. The sun is a harsh, glaring disk over the Italian coast, bleaching the color from the sea until the horizon disappears into a white haze. For the men on the bridge of the Drache, this glare is a curse. It hides periscopes, masks the low profiles of British motor torpedo boats, and strains eyes already red-rimmed from days of staring at nothing. But for Feldwebel Brenner, strapped into his open-air pulpit 500 meters above the ship, the glare is just another layer of the atmosphere to be conquered. He pushes the Kolibri higher, the Brahmo radial engine thrumming a steady, reassuring rhythm against the small of his back. Up here, the air is cooler, cleaner, and the geometry of the war changes completely. The glare that blinds the ship's lookouts becomes a transparent veil. He can look straight down into the depths, where the sunlight penetrates the water in shafts of turquoise and indigo. Kolibri Eins to bridge, sector north clear, proceeding to sector east, he reports, his voice vibrating through the throat microphone. The response is immediate. Understood, Kolibri, keep sharp. Intelligence reports a fast convoy expected from Malta. Brenner banks the machine, the intermeshing blades slicing the air with a distinctive whop-whop that has become a familiar sound to the sailors below, a sound that means safety. In the months since that first test off roads, the toy has grown up. The Drach and her sister ships have learned to dance with their hummingbirds. They turn into the wind, not just to launch float planes, but to catch the hovering Kolibri as it descends like a settling bird onto a platform barely larger than a living room rug. Brenner has learned to read the ship's roll, timing his touchdown for the split second the deck pauses at the top of a swell. He has flown in rain that stung his face like needles, in winds that would have grounded a standard reconnaissance plan, proving that this spiderweb of steel and canvas is tougher than it looks. Today, the mission is different. It isn't just about finding submarines. It is about coordinating a kill. 10 miles to the east, a pack of Schnellboats, fast attack craft, idles its engines, waiting for a vector. They are blind in the haze, reliant entirely on the eyes in the sky to guide them to their prey before the Allied destroyers can react. Brenner scans the horizon, his gaze snagging on a faint irregularity in the mist. It's not a ship, but a pattern of smoke, too rhythmic to be a cloud, too dark to be sea spray. He nudges the cyclic stick forward, the helicopter dipping its nose as it picks up speed, closing the distance at a modest 140 kilometers per hour. The smoke resolves into smudges, then shapes, 3 fat merchant ships riding low, flanked by the angular, predatory silhouettes of 2 destroyers. Contact, Brenner says, his voice flat, professional. 3 freighters, 2 escorts, grid square, Anton 4, course north-northwest. On the Draka, the radio operator scribbles furiously. Within seconds, the coordinates are relayed to the waiting Schnellboats. Brenner watches from his high perch as the sea below suddenly wakes up. White wakes bloom like flowers on the dark water as the German attack boats surge forward, guided by a voice from the clouds they cannot see. The Allied convoy commander, peering through binoculars on the bridge of a British destroyer, sees nothing but empty sea. He doesn't know that a German pilot is hovering 5 miles away, counting his ships, noting their speed, and directing a wolf pack to his flank. The helicopter is too small to appear on radar, too quiet to be heard over the roar of the ship's own engines, and too slow to be spotted as a threat until it is too late. As the first torpedoes streak through the water, leaving white trails that point like accusing fingers toward the freighters, Brenner feels a strange detachment. He is the god in the machine, the unseen puppeteer. Explosions bloom silently in the distance, followed seconds later by the dull crump of sound reaching his altitude. He watches a tanker list and begin to burn, black smoke boiling up to meet him. There is no joy in it, only the grim satisfaction of a job done with mathematical precision. But the war is not a one-way street. A flash from the lead destroyer, not an explosion but a muzzle flare. Then another. Black puffs of flak begin to stain the sky around him, silent at first, then cracking like whips. They have seen him, or at least they have guessed where the eyes are. Brenner yanks the collective lever, and the Kolibri shoots upward, dancing away from the bursting shells. A fixed-wing plane would have to bank and turn, losing sight of the target. The helicopter just slides sideways, effortless, keeping its nose pointed at the enemy while the flak bursts harmlessly in the empty air where it had been a second before. Target under attack, escorts engaging, Brenner reports, his voice steady despite the adrenaline singing in his veins. He is not just an observer anymore, he is a participant, dodging steel high above the burning sea. Below him, the Schnellboats turn and run, their job done, vanishing back into the haze. Brenner lingers a moment longer, watching the chaos he orchestrated, before turning the Kolibri back toward the Dracha. As he flies home, the adrenaline fades, leaving a cold clarity. The toy is a weapon now. And like all new weapons, its surprise will not last forever. The Allies will learn. They will bring their own eyes, their own fighters. But for today, in the skies over the Otranto Strait, the hummingbird is king. January 5, 1944. The Ministry of Aviation, RLM, offices, Berlin. Outside the high frost-rimed windows, the capital is a gray skeleton of its former self, scarred by nightly RAF raids and the growing desolation of a war turning sour. Inside, the mood is frantic but focused, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the rustle of paper. Requisition forms, damage reports, and desperate pleas for miracle weapons. Generalstabsengineer Roluf Lucht stares at the report on his mahogany desk. It is titled simply, Operational Evaluation of FL-282 Kolibri in Anti-Submarine Role. The pages are filled with praise from naval commanders who, only 2 years ago, had laughed at the idea of a flying windmill. Stable in heavy seas, one captain writes, capable of locating submerged targets where standard lookouts fail. And the most damning sentence of all, we need hundreds immediately. Lucht rubs his temples. For years, the RLM had prioritized speed and firepower, fighters to catch American bombers, jets to sweep the skies. Helicopters were sideshows, curiosities for transport or mountain rescue. But now, with the U-boat wolf packs being slaughtered in the Atlantic by Allied radar and escort carriers, the Kriegsmarine is begging for eyes that can fly from any deck. He picks up his fountain pen and signs the document that should have been signed in 1941. Order number 226/1. Immediate mass production of 1,000 units of the Flettner Fl 282B2. The contract is awarded not to Flettner's small, overwhelmed workshops, but to the industrial giant BMW. Their factories in Munich and Eisenach have the tooling, the workforce, and the capacity to churn out these machines like sausages. Get this to Munich tonight, Lucht snaps at an aide. Tell them this is priority 1 for the Naval Air Arm, no excuses. But as the aide hurries out, Lucht turns back to the window. He knows the truth that isn't in the report. The order exists on paper, but the reality is a logistical nightmare. The specialized Bramo engines haven't been built in years. The transmission gears require precision steel that is now being diverted to Panther tanks. And the skies over Germany no longer belong to the Luftwaffe. March 22, 1944, BMW plant Munich-Allach. The factory floor is a cathedral of noise, but it is the wrong kind of noise. It is not the hum of assembly lines, but the scream of air raid sirens. Workers drop their tools, spanners, welding torches, micrometers, and sprint for the concrete bunkers as the earth begins to tremble. Above the cloud layer, hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses drone relentlessly, their bomb bay doors yawning open. They are not targeting the tiny helicopter specifically. They are here to smash the aero engine works that power the Focke-Wulfs. But gravity is indiscriminate. High explosive bombs walk across the industrial complex in a thunderous line. Roof trusses buckle, glass shatters into deadly confetti, and machinery that took months to calibrate is twisted into scrap metal in a millisecond. In a corner of the vast hall, the tooling jigs for the FL-282, freshly installed, gleaming with oil, are buried under tons of collapsing brickwork. The 1,000 hummingbirds that were supposed to swarm over the Atlantic convoys die before they are even born. Anton Flettner, arriving the next day to inspect the progress, stands silently before the ruin. His toy had proven itself. It had flown from gun turrets in gale force winds. It had spotted submarines that no one else could see. And now it lies crushed under the weight of a war that has grown too big, too violent for delicate innovations to survive. Only 24 machines exist in the world. There will be no more. The order for 1,000 remains a ghost in a filing cabinet, another what if in a conflict rapidly running out of time. Flettner turns away, his boots crunching on the debris. He knows that from now on, every time a Kolibri takes off, it is an endangered species flying into extinction. April 26, 1945. Rangsdorf Airfield, near Berlin. The sky is a dirty bruise of smoke and low clouds. To the east, the horizon flashes incessantly. Not lightning, but the muzzle flashes of 1,000 Soviet artillery pieces pounding the Silo heights. The Red Army is not just coming, they are here. Their T-34 tanks grinding through the suburbs. Their Stormoviks prowling the treetops like hungry hawks. The Red Army is not just coming, they are here. A deep, steady narration with a calm but commanding tone, slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint. Controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective during tragic ones. Cinematic, documentary-style delivery with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. At Rangsdorf, home to the remnants of Lufttransportstaffel 40, the war has shrunk to a single runway and a handful of desperate men. Among the wreckage of Junkers transports and strafed hangars sit 3 surviving Fly F-282 Kolibris. They look even more fragile now against the backdrop of apocalypse. Their fabric skins patched, their paint faded, their rotors drooped in the damp air. Oberleutnant Hans Fuhr scuffs his boot in the mud near Kolibri V-21. He is tired. It is a bone-deep weariness that comes from flying artillery spotting missions for a Wehrmacht that has no artillery left to fire. Yesterday, he had hovered over the advancing Soviet columns, calling in coordinates to a battery that had already retreated or been overrun. Today, there is no one left to call. Fuel status? He asks, his voice raspy. The mechanic, an old man drafted from a retirement home, shakes his head. Enough for maybe an hour, Herr Oberleutnant. If you don't push the mixture. Fuhr nods. An hour is enough to reach the American lines to the west, or to die trying. A staff car screeches onto the tarmac, mud spraying from its wheels. A frantic officer jumps out, waving papers. We need a machine. Gauleiter Hunke needs extraction from Breslau. It's surrounded. Fjord looks at the officer, then at the fragile helicopter. Breslau is a fortress of hell, encircled for months. To fly there now would be suicide. A deep, steady narration with a calm but commanding tone. Slightly gravelly, mature voice that carries the weight of wartime history. Clear, deliberate pacing, never rushed, allowing tension to build naturally. Subtle emotional restraint, controlled intensity during dramatic moments, quieter and reflective during tragic ones. Cinematic, documentary-style delivery with precise emphasis on key names, dates, and actions. A voice that sounds authoritative, historical, and inevitable. The Kolibri is not a transport major, Ford says quietly. It lifts one man, two if they are starving. Then send two, the major screams. But the order dissolves in the roar of engines starting up. Not the staff car, but the helicopters. Ford climbs into the open cockpit of V-21. He isn't going to Breslau. He signals to the other two pilots. Start up, we go west. The radial engine coughs, spits blue smoke, and catches. The intermeshing blades begin their rhythmic dance, slicing through the smoke of burning Berlin. As they lift off, the airfield below them erupts. Soviet Yak-9 fighters sweep in low, cannons tearing up the runway. Ford yanks the collective, and the Kolibri shoots upward, hiding in the only place it can, the chaotic, smoke-filled sky itself. He weaves between the pillars of black smoke rising from burning fuel depots, a tiny gnat in a storm of giants. Below him, he sees the end of the Third Reich. Columns of refugees clogging the roads, burning tanks, the gray tide of Soviet infantry flooding the fields. One of the other Kolibris, flown by a young corporal, lags behind. Ford watches helplessly as a Soviet fighter spots it. The Yak doesn't even bother to slow down. A short burst of 20mm cannon fire, and the helicopter disintegrates, a flutter of canvas and steel tumbling into the pine trees. There is no radio call, no scream. Just gone. Fjord pushes his machine lower, skimming the treetops, his landing gear brushing the tips of the pines. He is flying on instinct now, the engine temperature gauge climbing into the red. He has to make it to the American lines. Not to save himself, but to save the machine. He knows that what he is flying is the future. If it burns here, the secrets of the intermeshing rotors, the stability, the vision of vertical flight might burn with it. Hours later, or maybe minutes, time has lost its meaning. He sees it. Not the red stars of the east, but the white stars of the west. Sherman tanks parked in a muddy field near the Elbe. Ford cuts the throttle, flaring the Kolibri for a landing. He sets it down gently, right in the middle of a startled American tank platoon. Soldiers scramble, weapons raised, staring at the strange alien insect that has just dropped from the sky. Ford shuts down the engine. The blades slow. Whop, 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 until they stop, drooping like exhausted wings. He unbuckles his harness and raises his hands, not in surrender, but in a strange kind of offering. "Don't shoot," he says in broken English to the GI who climbs onto the strut. This is not a weapon. It is a beginning. The American soldier looks at the weird double rotors, then at the tired German pilot. "Whatever you say, Mac," he grunts, spitting tobacco juice. "Looks like a hell of a way to travel." The Fla 282 Kolibri V-21 sits cooling in the spring air, a survivor of a war it was never meant to fight, waiting to be crated up and shipped to a new world where its descendants will one day fill the skies.